If you believe in the power of love, subscribe to Bear Tales for more heart-touching stories. Don't forget to comment your thoughts, because every love story deserves to be felt and shared.
What would you do if the secret of your pregnancy was revealed in the worst possible way? It was supposed to be a perfect night. I prepared Ethan's favorite dinner, hoping to finally earn his mother's approval after weeks of tension. But when my mother-in-law whispered something into his ear, I saw his face shift from calm to furious in an instant. And then, in a moment of pure shock, he slapped me, his pregnant wife. Before I even understood what was happening, the shock, the tears, and the overwhelming nausea hit me all at once. Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever forgive him? More importantly, could I stay with someone who had hurt me and our baby like this? I still recall the sound of my mother-in-law's heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she walked toward Ethan. The aroma of the lasagna I had spent hours preparing filled the air, and I was hoping, desperately hoping, that tonight I would finally earn her approval. My stomach was in knots. Morning sickness had hit me hard, but I hadn't told anyone yet about the pregnancy. Then everything shifted. Vivian, my mother-in-law, placed her hand on Ethan's shoulder and leaned in, whispering something in his ear. I watched in real time as his face shifted from calm to furious in a matter of seconds. The warm brown eyes I had once fallen in love with turned cold, and he turned his gaze on me. "Is this true?" he demanded, his voice full of accusation. He stood so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Have you been lying to me?" Before I could even respond, his hand shot out. The slap was so hard, so sudden that I lost my balance, stumbling back into the wall. My cheek burned, and the room seemed to spin around me as tears welled up in my eyes. And then it happened. The wave I'd been holding back all evening, the one I couldn't control anymore. In front of both of them, I threw up. Ethan took a step back, visibly disgusted, but froze when he noticed something in my purse that had fallen open on the floor. A positive pregnancy test had slipped out. His face drained of color as he looked from the test to me. "Grace, are you?" His voice trailed off, the words unable to form. I reached up to touch my stinging cheek, tears streaming down my face. "Yes," I whispered. "I'm pregnant. I was going to tell you tonight. That's why I made your favorite dinner." The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stared at the pregnancy test, then at his hand, the one he had just used to strike his pregnant wife. Vivian stood frozen, her perfectly painted lips pressed into a thin line, but even she couldn't hide the shock in her eyes. "Oh my God," Ethan muttered, his voice trembling. "Grace, I. He reached for me, but I flinched away, my body instinctively retreating. The man who had promised to love and protect me had just hit me while I was carrying his child. In that moment, as I watched Ethan wrestle with the horror of what he had just done, it hit me. Our lives would never be the same. The secret I had wanted to share with Joy had been revealed in the worst way possible. And now I had to decide. Could I ever trust him again? Could I forgive him? More importantly, could I stay with someone who had shown that he might hurt me and our baby? The sound of a door creaking open startled all of us. Chloe, our next-door neighbor, stood in the doorway, concern written all over her face. "I heard shouting," she said, taking in the scene, my red cheek, Ethan's guilty expression, Vivian's tense posture. "Is everything okay?" I knew deep down that nothing was okay, and that nothing would be for a long time. I remember the day I met Ethan as though it was yesterday. It was a Friday afternoon at Carter's coffee shop in downtown Austin. I had been grading papers. Being a third-grade teacher meant that my weekends began with a stack of math worksheets and creative writing assignments. Ethan accidentally spilled his coffee on my students' homework, and his frantic attempts to salvage the papers made me laugh. "I promise I'm not usually this clumsy," he said, desperately dabbing at the papers with napkins. "Please let me make it up to you. Or maybe dinner." That's how it started. Simple, sweet, and completely perfect. Ethan was everything I dreamed of. Successful but humble, funny but responsible. And he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. Our first year of marriage was beautiful. We bought a small house with a backyard, talked about having kids someday, and spent weekends making plans for our future. Then Vivian moved in. "It's just temporary, honey," Ethan assured me. "Mom's having a hard time with the divorce. She needs support right now." I wanted to be understanding. I did. But Vivian had a way of making me feel small in my own home. Nothing I did was ever good enough. The house wasn't clean enough, my cooking wasn't to her standards, and apparently, I wasn't taking good enough care of her precious son. Ethan works so hard, she'd say, watching me pack his lunch. He needs more protein than that. When I was taking care of him. The changes in Ethan were subtle at first. He started criticizing things he'd never noticed before. The way I folded his shirts, the food I cooked, how much time I spent talking to my sister on the phone. Each criticism was preceded by those private, whispered conversations with his mother. When I found out I was pregnant, I should have been overjoyed. Instead, I felt terrified. I hid the morning sickness, making excuses to rush to the bathroom at school. I kept crackers in my desk drawer and blamed my fatigue on end-of-semester stress. I wanted to tell Ethan first, to have just one moment of joy between us before Vivian took over with her opinions on how I should handle my pregnancy. The night of the slap, I'd finally worked up the courage. I'd planned everything perfectly, Ethan's favorite lasagna, his preferred wine, which I wouldn't be drinking, and even a little onesie to surprise him with. But Vivian insisted on coming to dinner. "Family dinners are important," she said, inviting herself. I was in the kitchen layering the pasta when I overheard Vivian on the phone. "She's hiding something, I know it. I saw her running to the bathroom at odd hours. Probably having an affair. My Ethan deserves better than that." My hands shook as I placed the lasagna in the oven. An affair? Is that what she whispered to Ethan at dinner? Is that why he was so quick to believe the worst about me? Standing in our dining room now, with Chloe witnessing the aftermath of what just happened, I felt the weight of every wrong assumption, every whispered lie, every moment I stayed quiet to keep the peace. My hand moved protectively to my stomach. The baby inside me deserved better than this. I deserved better than this. "Grace," Ethan stepped toward me again, his voice breaking. "Please let me explain." But Chloe had already wrapped her arm around my shoulders. "She's coming with me," she said firmly. "And you better not try to stop her." As Chloe led me out of the house, I heard Vivian's voice behind us. "Ethan, darling, she's hysterical. You know how women get in her condition." The door closed behind us, muffling Vivian's words. We also do couples counseling. But the damage was already done. And if you ever raise a hand to me again, I'm gone shattered in a single evening. Chances I had no idea how to pick up file for full custody. Her fingers clenched into a fist. I understand. He reached for his phone, pulling up an email. "I've already found a couples counselor," and he slid a business card across the table. "This is my lawyer. I've asked her to draw papers giving you full custody if I ever become violent again. One incident, that's all it would take. The papers are being prepared now." My hand trembled as I picked up the card. "You're serious about this?" "I love you, Grace. I love our baby, and I hate myself for what I did." He looked down at his hands. When I heard that heartbeat, I realized I was becoming the kind of father I never wanted to be, the kind that makes their child afraid. The silence between us was heavy with unspoken fears and hopes. Finally I spoke. "I'm not coming home today," I said. "I need time, and we start couples counseling first." He nodded, relief visible on his face. Would it be okay if I came to the next doctor's appointment?" For the first time since that horrible night, I felt a tiny spark of hope. "Yes," I said, "but Chloe comes too." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "Whatever you need to feel safe." As we sat there, the afternoon light streaming through the coffee shop windows, I realized we were at a crossroads. The path forward would be hard, filled with counseling sessions and rebuilding trust, but at least now there was a path. The next 2 weeks were a strange dance of careful boundaries and small steps forward. Ethan attended his therapy sessions twice a week, sending me photos of his check-ins at the therapist's office. Dr. Martinez, our couples counselor, helped us start rebuilding, mainly through supervised sessions where we learned to communicate without Vivian's toxic influence. But Vivian wasn't going quietly. "Ethan, your mother's outside my classroom again," I texted him one Tuesday morning. Through the window I could see her sitting in her silver Mercedes watching the school entrance. My third graders were at recess, but my hands shook as I typed. His response was immediate. "Don't move, I'm calling the police." Minutes later I watched through my classroom window as 2 police officers approached Vivian's car. She played the perfect victim, tears, trembling hands, just a concerned mother worried about her son's marriage. But when they told her to leave, her mask slipped. "She's poisoning my son against me," she screamed loud enough that I could hear her through the closed windows. "She trapped him with that baby." My classroom aide Ashley placed a protective hand on my shoulder. "Want me to film this?" she whispered. "Might be useful for that restraining order you mentioned." I nodded, grateful for her quick thinking. That evening during our counseling session, Ethan broke down when I showed him the video. I never saw it Before he said, his voice hollow, how she really is. She acted exactly like she did when Dad left, screaming, making accusations, playing the victim, and he looked at Dr. Martinez. I always believed her version of everything. The generational pattern of abuse is strong, Dr. Martinez said gently, her tone calm yet firm. But Ethan, you're breaking it every time you choose grace and your child over your mother's manipulation. You're breaking it. Later that week we had another prenatal appointment. Chloe drove me there with Ethan following in his car, a new safety measure we'd put in place. The ultrasound technician guided us through the scan, and for the first time since that night Ethan reached out and took my hand. I let him. Would you like to know the gend? The technician asked, her voice warm. Ethan looked at me silently, asking for permission. I nodded. It's a girl. The technician smiled, pointing to our baby's tiny form on the screen. A girl, I whispered, placing my free hand on my stomach protectively. Looking at Ethan, I could see the same thought in his eyes. Our daughter would never know the fear of living in a home where love was conditional, where manipulation and violence had been the norm. That evening, as Chloe and I were leaving the clinic, we found Vivian waiting in the parking lot. Before I could react, Ethan stepped between us, his body a barrier. Leave, he said, his voice cold but resolute. Now or I'm calling the police again. I have a right to know about my granddaughter. Vivian's voice rose, laced with hysteria. She must have been eavesdropping through the clinic walls. No, you don't, Ethan replied, his tone firm like steel. You lost that right the moment you made me hurt her mother. Vivian's face twisted with fury. I never made you do anything. She's turning you against me just like your father. Security is on their way, Chloe interrupted, holding up her phone. They've been instructed to call the police immediately if you don't leave. Vivian's eyes flashed with rage, but she finally backed away toward her car. This isn't over, she shouted. That's my grandbaby. As Vivian retreated, Chloe turned to me with a reassuring smile, but my chest felt heavy. That night in Chloe's guest room, I finally allowed myself to break down. Ethan sat just outside the door. We weren't quite ready for him to stay the night yet, but he refused to leave me alone after Vivian's outburst. I've filed for the restraining order, he said softly through the door. For all three of us, you, me, and the baby. My lawyer says with the school video and the clinic incident we'll get it. I pressed my hand against the door, feeling his presence on the other side, mirroring my gesture. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice raw. For everything I put you through, for every time I didn't protect you, for every time I chose her over you. I know, I said softly, but Ethan, I need you to understand something. Anything. I'm not doing this for us, I'm doing it for her. I touched my growing belly. She deserves better than what we had. Yes, he agreed, she does, and I swear, Grace, she'll have it. We'll give her everything we never had. Safety, trust, love without condition. For the first time in weeks I believed him. The days following the restraining order were a delicate balance of progress and uncertainty. Ethan kept his word, attending therapy, checking in before visiting, and respecting my space. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights I still woke up shaking, my body recalling the fear before my mind even registered the nightmare. And on those nights Ethan never pushed. Instead, he would leave a quiet text, "I'm here if you need me." One afternoon, as I graded papers in Chloe's kitchen, Ethan arrived early for our scheduled counseling session. He carried a small wrapped box. My eyes narrowed. "What's that?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "A gift. For our daughter." I hesitated before unwrapping it, my fingers brushing over soft fabric. A tiny onesie, pale yellow, with the words "braver than yesterday" stitched in cursive. My throat tightened. "I know I can't undo the past," Ethan said, voice low, steady. "But every day I want to prove that I can be better. For you. For her." Tears welled in my eyes, but I blinked them back. "Ethan, I don't need gifts. I need consistency. I need to know that when things get hard, you won't break again." He nodded, taking in my words. "I know. And I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. Just a chance to keep proving it." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. A restricted number. My stomach twisted. Chloe, who had been pretending not to listen, tensed beside me. "Don't answer it," she advised. But deep down I already knew who it was. With trembling hands I picked up the call and pressed the phone to my ear. A chillingly familiar voice seeped through the receiver. "You think a piece of paper can keep me away? Vivian." My grip tightened on the onesie as Ethan stiffened beside me, his entire posture shifting. Proactive. Unyielding. Chloe grabbed the phone, put it on speaker, and crossed her arms. "Vivian, this is harassment. Back off before we involve the police." Again. A cold chuckle. "You have no idea what's coming." The line went dead, leaving a silence heavier than the words spoken. Ethan's jaw clenched. That's it. We're not waiting for her to make another move. A spark of fear ignited in my chest, but alongside it, something else: determination. I looked at Ethan, my voice steadier than I felt. Then let's end this. Together. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. We took no chances. Chloe helped me document the call, filing another police report, but it wasn't enough to ease the growing fear that clawed at my chest. Vivian was relentless. She wasn't just a bitter ex, she was dangerous. And she had nothing to lose. Ethan doubled down on security, installing new locks and cameras around the house. She won't get near you, he promised, his voice laced with quiet rage. I won't let her. But the anxiety remained, lurking beneath the surface. I barely slept, my mind replaying Vivian's words over and over. You have no idea what's coming. Then the note started. The first was slipped under my windshield wiper outside the school where I worked. You stole him from me. The second arrived in my mailbox, the paper smeared as if someone had been gripping it too hard. He'll never be yours completely. I'll make sure of it. Each message chipped away at my fragile sense of safety. Ethan, seeing the notes, grew more furious by the day. She's escalating, he muttered, pacing the living room late one night. She's testing boundaries. I sat on the couch, holding my belly instinctively. What do we do? Ethan turned to me, his eyes burning with a mix of anger and protectiveness. We stopped playing defense. The next morning, Ethan took matters into his own hands. He met with a private investigator, someone with experience dealing with stalkers. If the police won't take this seriously, we'll make sure someone does, he told me, his jaw set. Meanwhile, I tried to keep life as normal as possible. I still went to work, still met with Chloe, still tried to breathe through the fear that wrapped itself around me like a vice. But deep down I knew we were heading for a confrontation. And I had no idea if we'd make it out unscathed. Then came the breaking point. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening. I was in the nursery, folding the onesie Ethan had given me, when the sound of shattering glass rang through the house. I froze. My heart stopped. Then Ethan's voice, sharp, filled with fury. Vivian. I rushed to the living room just in time to see her standing there, wild-eyed, a rock still clutched in her trembling fingers. The window beside her was shattered, glass glittering on the floor like fallen stars. Chloe, who had been staying over, reached for her phone. I'm calling the police. But Vivian didn't seem to hear. Her gaze locked onto me, her lips curling into a twisted smile. You thought you could take him from me? She spat. You thought I'd just let you? Ethan stepped between us, his body rigid, shielding me. You need to leave. Now. Vivian let out a breathless laugh. Or what? You'll hurt me? Like you hurt her. I sucked in a sharp breath, my fingers tightening on the fabric in my hands. Ethan's fists clenched. I'm not that man anymore. Vivian's expression flickered just for a second before twisting back into something cruel. We'll see about that. Sirens wailed in the distance. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope.